My name is Rashid Al-Fahad, and the weight of that sword in my hands was exactly 3 kilograms. 90 centimeters of folded Damascus steel, sharpened until it could slice through the air itself. I had seen this sword separate heads from bodies with one clean stroke. I had watched as necks opened like ripe fruit under its edge. I knew the exact angle, the precise speed, the perfect force required. But when I brought that blade down toward my younger brother's neck, when the steel touched his skin, it bent like rubber, like plastic, like the laws of physics themselves had been rewritten in that single impossible moment. And everything I believed about God shattered before my eyes. For 18 years, I was the Imam of the Grand Mosque of Riyadh, one of the largest mosques in all of Saudi Arabia. Every Friday, I led 5,000 faithful in prayer. My white thobe was always immaculate, pressed with crisp lines that spoke of authority. My turban was wound with the perfection that only decades of practice can achieve. My beard was dyed with traditional henna according to ancestral customs, a deep reddish brown that marked me as a man of religious standing. When I walked through the marble corridors of the mosque, men lowered their eyes in respect. Women stepped aside, pulling their children close. Young boys pointed at me with a mixture of admiration and fear. I was powerful, I was respected, I was feared, and I believed that this was exactly as God intended. I was 42 years old when my world began to collapse, not with an earthquake, but with a phone call. At 3:15 in the morning on March 19th, my phone vibrated on the nightstand, shattering the silence of my home in the exclusive Al-Malka district. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. I considered not answering, letting it go to voicemail, returning to sleep. But something inside me, some instinct I couldn't name, compelled me to answer. Imam Al-Fahad. The voice was dry, official, completely devoid of emotion. Yes, who is this? Religious police. Your brother Khalid has been arrested at King Khalid International Airport attempting to leave the country. Prohibited materials were found in his possession. Christian literature. A Bible. He has confessed to apostasy. The world stopped. Apostasy, the most dangerous word in the entire kingdom. The word that means betrayal of faith, abandonment of Islam, rejection of everything sacred. The word that carries only one sentence: public execution. There must be some mistake, I whispered, though my voice sounded hollow even to myself. My brother is a petroleum engineer. He works for the national company. He is a respectable man. Was, the voice interrupted. Not anymore. Now he is an apostate. And you, as Imam and as his elder brother, will be summoned tomorrow to the religious council. Good morning. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, the phone still trembling in my hand. Khalid, my younger brother, 7 years younger than me, the boy who used to follow me everywhere after our parents died in a car accident when he was only 11 years old. I raised him. I guided him. I taught him to pray, to recite the Quran, to be a good Muslim. How had I failed so completely? Dawn came too quickly. At 9 in the morning, I presented myself at the Religious Council building, an imposing complex of stone and glass in the heart of Riyadh. I was led to a conference room with black marble floors and walls covered in golden Arabic calligraphy. 7 men awaited me, seated behind a long table. I knew all of them. I had shared tea with them, debated theology with them, laughed with them. But that day, their faces were stone. Imam Al-Fahad, began Sheikh Al-Harbi, the eldest of the group, his voice resonating like distant thunder. Your brother has committed the worst of crimes. He has rejected Islam. He has embraced the religion of the infidels. He attempted to flee like a coward in the night. He was arrested, another continued, along with his wife Amira and their 2 children. Samir, 12 years old, and Layla, 9. All of them now wear crosses hanging from their necks. All of them confess to following Jesus. My heart sank deeper with each word. Not just Khalid, but Amira too. my sweet sister-in-law who made the best kabsa in all of Riyadh. And the children, dear God, the children. The sentence is clear, declared Al-Harbi, his eyes fixed on mine without an ounce of mercy. Public beheading, an example so that others do not follow this path of perdition. I nodded slowly, though every fiber of my being screamed in protest. I knew the law. I had taught it from the pulpit myself for nearly 2 decades. Then Al-Harbi leaned forward, and his next words pierced through me like spears. And you, Imam al-Fahad, will execute the sentence. You will wield the sword. You will restore the honor of your family. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own breathing, rapid and shallow. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead despite the air conditioning. I cannot, I finally whispered. He is my brother. We grew up together. I am all the family he has left. I cannot. Cannot? Al-Harbi's voice rose in volume. The great Imam of the most important mosque in Riyadh cannot fulfill the law of God. Do you also doubt the faith? It is not that, I tried to explain, but my voice was breaking. It is just that he is my brother. Then, said another council member with calculated coldness, you share his fate, and your wife as well, all publicly executed, and it will not be quick, Imam al-Fahad. It will be slow, it will be painful. It will be a lesson no one will ever forget. They let me go with that threat hanging over my head like a suspended sword. I had 48 hours to decide, execute my brother or watch his entire family die in the most horrible way imaginable and then follow them myself. That night I could not sleep. I walked through my house like a ghost, past the photographs on the walls. Khalid and me as children, smiling in front of our parents' house. Khalid at his engineering graduation. Me standing beside him with fraternal pride visible in every line of my face. Khalid at his wedding to Amira. Me performing the ceremony in my imam robes. How had it come to this? The next day, I obtained permission to visit Khalid at Al-Hair prison, a grey concrete complex on the outskirts of Riyadh. I was led through narrow corridors that smelled of disinfectant and despair to a small cell with rusted bars. Khalid was sitting on the cement floor, dressed in the orange uniform of prisoners. When he saw me, he rose slowly. He looked thin, skeletal even, but his eyes shone with something I had never seen before. Peace. In the middle of all that horror, my brother radiated peace. Rashid, he said softly, approaching the bars. Brother, why? The words came out of my mouth like a groan. Why did you do this? Why did you put your family in danger? Why did you destroy everything? Khalid reached through the bars and took my hand. His skin was cold, but his grip was firm. Because I found the truth, brother. Jesus appeared to me 2 years ago. I was working in the desert at a remote oil field. It was midnight. I was alone in my tent. And suddenly there was a light that did not come from any lamp. And a voice that said to me, Khalid, why do you persecute me? I was not persecuting anyone, but I understood. I was persecuting the truth by following a lie. That is blasphemy, I whispered, but without conviction. Is it? Khalid looked at me with those eyes full of impossible peace. Rashid, you know something is not right. You have known it for years. You have seen the executions. You have seen the harshness. You have seen how we punish people for love, for freedom, for seeking God in a different way. Is this really what God wants? I did not answer. I could not. He continued. I'm going to be sentenced, Khalid. I know it. And I know they are going to force you to carry out the sentence. It is the perfect way to break your spirit, to show who is in control. I will not do it, I said with a firmness I did not feel. I refuse. Then we will all be executed, Khalid responded with supernatural calm. Me, Amira, Samir, Layla, and then you. Is it worth that, brother? Is it worth the children dying just because you refuse? What do you want me to do then? Tears were streaming down my face now, uncontrolled. An imam crying in a prison cell. What a pathetic image. "If you need to do this to save my family, do it," Khalid said, his voice steady. "Jesus already forgave those who pierced him with spears and nails. I forgive you too, brother. I forgive you before you even raised the sword." Those words haunted me for the next 48 hours. They haunted me as preparations for the public execution were made. They haunted me as they dressed me in my ceremonial imam robes. The finest white thobe, the elaborate turban, the leather belt embroidered with verses from the Quran. They haunted me as they led me to Dira Square, known to everyone as Justice Square, though justice was the last thing found there. It was Friday, March 23rd, right after the noon prayer. The desert sun fell mercilessly on the square, transforming the white marble into a surface that burned bare feet. Thousands of people filled the space. Many were forced to attend. Others came out of morbid curiosity. They had built an elevated stage in the center of the square, a wooden platform 3 meters by 3 meters, raised 1 meter off the ground so everyone could see clearly. Khalid was already there, kneeling in the center of the platform. He wore the simple white thobe they give to the condemned, without ornaments, without embroidery, without anything indicating identity or humanity. Beside him, tied with ropes but not gagged, were Amira, Samir, and Layla. The little girl was crying silently, her small body shaken by sobs that broke the heart. Samir was trying to be brave, but I could see the terror in his 12-year-old eyes. They made me climb onto the stage. My legs barely supported me. A guard approached, carrying the execution sword in a red velvet sheath. He withdrew it with ceremonial reverence and handed it to me. The sword was a masterpiece of ancient forging, 90 centimeters total length, 60-centimeter blade. Authentic Damascus steel with wavy patterns visible on the surface, the result of folding the metal thousands of times during its creation. Ebony wood handle with silver inlays, perfectly balanced, exactly 3 kilograms. Sharpened to the point where it could cut a hair floating in the air. I had seen dozens of executions with this same sword. I had seen how the steel cut through muscle, tendon, bone, and cartilage as if they were butter. I had seen heads separate from bodies in fractions of a second. I knew exactly how efficient it was, how deadly, how final. I need to pause my story for a moment and ask you something. Have you ever felt completely trapped by circumstances beyond your control? That moment when you realize there is no good choice, only terrible ones. I remember standing on that platform, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life, believing I was the only one facing such an impossible decision. If you are feeling trapped right now, I want you to know something. You are not alone. There are thousands watching this who understand exactly what it means to face impossible choices, unbearable pressure, situations where every option seems wrong. Would you be brave enough to share just a small part of your journey? You can simply comment, "I understand impossible choices," or "I have faced this pressure too." Your words, even anonymous ones, might be exactly what someone else needs to feel less alone in their darkest moment. I know this takes courage. I know some of you may need to use a different account or device. Your safety matters more than anything, but if you can, your comment might be the first time someone else feels truly understood. Now, let me continue with what happened next. I held the sword with both hands, feeling the familiar weight. I had practiced the correct movement years ago, when I was young and ambitious, and believed that serving in executions was a sacred honor. I knew the exact angle. 45 degrees descending, impact right at the 3rd cervical vertebra, where the neck is most vulnerable. I knew the necessary speed, fast but controlled, letting the weight of the sword do most of the work. I knew the required force, enough to cut through, but not so much as to lose balance after impact. I positioned myself behind Khalid. He was not trembling. He was not begging. He simply kept his head bowed, his lips moving in silent prayer. Probably praying to Jesus, I thought bitterly, praying to the God who had led him to this square, to this moment, to this sentence. I raised the sword above my head, holding it with both hands in the standard execution position. The sun reflected off the steel, creating a glare that temporarily blinded some spectators. The crowd remained in absolute silence. 5,000 people holding their breath at the same time creates a void of sound that becomes deafening in its absence. Khalid turned his head slightly and looked at me. His eyes met mine, and in that moment I saw something that broke me. I saw forgiveness. No hatred, no fear, no accusation. Just pure, unconditional, impossible forgiveness. "It is okay, brother," he whispered low enough that only I could hear. "If you need to do this to save my family, do it. Jesus already forgave those who crucified him. I forgive you too." Something broke inside me in that instant, but training took control. Years of martial discipline, years of practice, years of conditioning. My body moved by instinct, without conscious thought. I brought the sword down with all the strength of my arms, all the speed of my muscles, all the desperation of my soul. The sword struck Khalid's neck and bent like rubber, like flexible plastic, like soft wire. The Damascus steel, forged over months, tempered in boiling oil, sharpened to cut bone, had suddenly transformed into something without any rigidity. The blade hit my brother's skin and simply curved over itself, bending in an impossible arc. It did not cut. It did not penetrate. It did not leave a scratch, a red mark, or a drop of blood. My brother was still kneeling, completely unharmed, looking at me with eyes as surprised as mine. The crowd gasped. 5,000 people inhaling simultaneously, a sound like sudden wind rushing through a narrow canyon. I lifted the sword again, examining it with disbelief. The blade was now straight again, as if it had never bent. The metal gleamed under the sun, perfect, without visible deformations. I touched the blade with my thumb carefully, still sharp as a razor. "What are you waiting for?" shouted the judge from his elevated position beside the stage. "Complete the sentence." I positioned the sword again. This time, I put even more force. Every muscle in my back, shoulders, and arms tensed to the maximum. I screamed as I brought down the blow, releasing all the frustration, the pain, the confusion. The sword bent exactly the same. The steel touched Khalid's neck and flexed like a willow branch, curving completely, causing no damage whatsoever. Then, when I pulled it away, it returned to its straight form instantly, as if it had shape memory, as if the metal itself refused to participate in this execution. "Impossible!" The shout came from the judge, his face reddened with rage and panic. "Bring another sword, now!" A guard ran to the arsenal of the adjacent government complex. He returned 3 minutes later with a second execution sword, slightly heavier with a wider blade. He handed it over with trembling hands. "Try again, same position, same angle, same force." The result was identical. The steel bent on contact with my brother's skin, flexing impossibly, refusing to cut. Not a scratch, not a mark, nothing. The crowd began to murmur, first quietly, then louder and louder. The murmur transformed into agitated conversations, then into shouts of confusion and fear. "It is witchcraft," someone shouted from behind. "The heretic has summoned demons." "No," responded another voice. "It is a miracle. Allah protects him." "Allah does not protect infidels," replied a third. "This is the work of the devil." They brought a third sword, then a fourth, then a fifth. Each one was different. Different sizes, different weights, different forging styles. Some were ancient, centuries old, passed down through generations of executioners. Others were modern, manufactured with contemporary techniques. All did exactly the same thing. Each sword, without exception, bent when touching Khalid's neck, as if his skin were harder than the finest steel ever forged. And each time, after bending, the metal returned to its original form, perfectly straight, as if nothing had happened. By the time I tried with the fifth sword, Chaos had completely exploded in the square. Half the crowd was screaming that it was sorcery, that Khalid should be burned immediately. The other half insisted it was divine intervention, that God himself was clearly protecting the prisoner. Some began fighting with each other, shoving that turned into punches. The judge and the other religious officials were in total panic. I saw Al-Harbi speaking frantically on his cell phone, undoubtedly informing higher authorities about this unprecedented disaster. Never, in the documented history of Saudi Arabia, had an execution failed this way. Never. In the middle of the chaos, something extraordinary happened. Several guards who had been watching the platform began moving with coordinated purpose. They were men I knew vaguely, guards who had always seemed different from the others, more thoughtful, less cruel. Silent questioners of the system. Later I learned they were part of a secret reformist movement, men tired of the constant executions, the extreme rigidity, the lack of mercy. They took advantage of the confusion perfectly. While everyone was arguing about what they had just witnessed, while the judge was shouting contradictory orders, while I remained on the platform with a useless sword in my trembling hands, these guards cut the ropes binding Amira, Samir and Layla. They lifted Khalid from the ground, and within seconds, all five had disappeared into the confusion of the crowd. By the time the authorities realized what had happened, it was too late. Khalid and his family were escorted out of the square, placed in an unmarked vehicle, and were on their way to the border. I remained on the platform, still holding the sword, still wearing my Imam robes, still processing what my eyes had seen, but my mind refused to accept. Steel bending like rubber. 5 different swords, all behaving in a physically impossible way. My brother unharmed after 6 beheading attempts with force sufficient to cut through a tree trunk. The guards arrested me immediately, of course. They accused me of complicity, conspiracy, of deliberately allowing the escape. They stripped me of my ceremonial robes right there in public, removing every symbol of my religious authority, the turban I had worn with such pride for nearly 2 decades, the white thobe that identified me as Imam of the Grand Mosque, the embroidered belt that had been a gift from my mentor when I assumed the position. I stood in my basic undergarments before thousands of people, humiliated in the most complete way possible. Then they dressed me in the orange prison uniform and took me in the back of a truck, not even the dignity of a closed police vehicle, so everyone could see the great Imam al-Fahad falling from grace. I was locked in the same cell where Khalid had been. The cement floor still had the marks of where he had slept. The walls still carried the scratches from his fingernails. The air still had a faint smell of his fear and his faith mixed together. The first months were absolute hell, daily interrogations lasting hours. How did you do it? What trick did you use? Was there something special about the sword? Did you put some chemical on your brother's neck? They asked over and over. The same questions, in different variations, shouted by different men, with the same hatred in their eyes. I did nothing. I responded each time. I do not know what happened. The sword simply bent. They did not believe me. They tortured me, looking for a confession that did not exist. Not with physical blows, that would be too obvious, but with more subtle methods, sleep deprivation, exposure to extreme cold for hours, then unbearable heat, constant sounds that did not let me think, bright lights 24 hours a day that made it impossible to know if it was day or night. But the worst was something different. Every week they showed me videos, recordings of other successful executions performed in the same square, some with the same swords that failed with me. They forced me to watch as heads were separated from bodies with a single clean stroke, over and over, dozens of executions, hundreds. See, they told me, the swords work perfectly. So why did they not work with you? What did you do? I had no answer. I could only stare at those screens with growing horror, seeing what I myself had supported for so many years. seeing the brutality I had defended as necessary, seeing the cruelty I had justified as the will of God. And slowly, in that cold cell, with nothing but time and my thoughts, I began to question everything. If God really wanted my brother dead, why had he prevented the execution in such a dramatic way? If Islam was the only truth, why had he shown such obvious favor to an apostate? If we were right, why did God himself seem to be on the side of the one we called heretic? The questions tormented me day and night. And gradually, inevitably, I came to a conclusion that changed everything. The God who can make steel bend before his children is the true God, not the God of harshness and execution. Not the God of the sword that cuts, but the God of the sword that refuses to cut. The God who protects instead of punishes. In my second year of prison, in the absolute solitude of my cell, without a Quran, without a prayer rug, without anything but cement walls and my broken conscience, I did something I never imagined possible. I spoke to Jesus. I do not know if you exist, I whispered in the darkness. I do not know if my brother was right. But if you are real, if it was you who bent those swords, I need to know. I need the same peace I saw in Khalid's eyes when I visited him in this same cell. I need the truth, whatever the cost. There was no blinding light. There was no audible voice. There was no dramatic angelic appearance, but something changed inside me in that moment. A peace I cannot explain with words began to fill the empty spaces of my soul. An inexplicable certainty that I was not alone, that I had never been alone, that even in that dark prison there was a divine presence with me. That night I slept without nightmares for the first time in 2 years. I woke up different, transformed, converted. The third year was more bearable. They no longer interrogated me as frequently. The authorities decided I really did not know how the miracle had happened, that I was probably as much a victim as an accomplice. My sentence was reduced, not out of mercy, but political convenience. Keeping me imprisoned indefinitely only created more questions about why the swords had bent. Finally, on a hot day in August, 3 years and 5 months after my arrest, I was called to the prison director's office. "Imam al-Fahad," he began. "Though I was no longer Imam of anything, it has been decided that you will be released under strict conditions. You must leave Saudi Arabia within 48 hours. You must never return. You must never speak publicly about what happened in the square. If you violate these conditions, the original sentence will be reinstated and executed without further trial." They handed me a passport, a plane ticket to Istanbul, Turkey, and $500 American. That was everything. 3.5 years of my life, reduced to a passport and $500. I left the prison in the same clothes I wore when I entered, the torn remains of my prisoner uniform. I had nowhere to go in Riyadh. My house had been confiscated, my bank accounts frozen. My former friends and colleagues avoided me like I was contagious. I was a complete pariah, a living reminder of an event the government preferred to forget. The flight to Istanbul departed 36 hours later. I spent that time at the airport, sleeping on plastic benches, using public restrooms to wash myself as best I could. People looked at me with contempt or pity, not knowing my story, just seeing a man who had obviously fallen from grace. When the plane took off from Riyadh, I looked out the window, watching the city where I had spent my entire life become smaller and smaller. The golden desert stretched to the horizon. The towers of the mosques became insignificant dots, and I felt, for the first time in years, something like freedom. Istanbul was chaos and beauty mixed together. I arrived knowing no one, speaking no Turkish, having no plan beyond survival. I spent the first week sleeping in homeless shelters, eating at charity kitchens, learning the streets of a city that was not mine. But God, the God of the bent swords, had different plans. One day, walking through the Fatih district, I heard voices singing in Arabic. I followed the sound to a discreet building with a small cross above the door. An Arabic church, I realized. A meeting place for Christian refugees from Middle Eastern countries. I hesitated at the entrance. Entering would mean publicly admitting my new faith. It would mean crossing a line from which there would be no return. But the voices singing drew me with magnetic force. I pushed the door and entered. The congregation was small, maybe 40 people, men and women, young and old, all singing with a passion I had rarely seen in mosques where 5,000 people prayed mechanically. And then, in the third row, I saw something that stopped my heart. Khalid. My brother turned when he heard the door open. Our eyes met across the hall. For 3 eternal seconds, neither of us moved. Then he ran toward me, his arms opening, tears already streaming down his face. We embraced in the middle of the aisle while the congregation continued singing, unaware of the miracle of reunion happening. We embraced as the brothers we were, separated by prison and exile, reunited by divine providence in a foreign city. I looked for you, Khalid whispered in my ear. When I learned you were released, I searched everywhere. I knew God would bring you here. Amira and the children were there too. Samir, now a 15-year-old teenager, tall and confident. Layla, 12, with the same peace in her eyes I had seen in her father. All had survived, all were safe, all were together again. That night, after the service, Khalid and his family took me to the small apartment they shared in an old 3-story building. They prepared a feast with the little they had. Rice, chicken, salad, warm bread. We ate together, talked for hours, cried and laughed alternately. "Tell me everything," Khalid said finally. "What happened after we left?" I told everything. The prison, the psychological torture, the endless interrogations, the doubts that consumed me, the solitary conversion in my cell. When I finished, Khalid had tears in his eyes. "God did not just bend the swords to save me," he said slowly. "He bent them to save you too. To show you the truth in a way you could not deny. You witnessed an impossible miracle, Rashid, and that miracle freed you from years of blindness." He was right. All that horror had a purpose. God used the darkest moment of my life to break the chains that had bound me for decades. The following months were intense learning. Khalid taught me about Jesus, not the distorted version Islam presents, but the real Jesus of the Gospels. I read the Bible for the first time in my life, and the words leaped from the pages with a life I had never experienced reading the Quran. "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy," I read in Matthew. I thought of all the times I had preached about justice without mercy, about punishment without forgiveness, how much I had lost, how much damage I had caused. "Love your enemies," I read further. "Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you." I thought of the hatred I had fed against non-Muslims, the contempt I taught from the pulpit, how wrong I had been. But I also read about transformation, about change, about new beginnings. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. That was me now, a new creation. The old had passed. Everything had become new. 6 months after my arrival in Istanbul, the pastor of the Arabic church made me a proposal. "Rashid," he said, using my name without the title of Imam that I no longer deserved or desired, "your story needs to be told, not for your glory, but to show what God can do. Will you preach your testimony next Sunday?" I was terrified, preaching again. But this time the truth instead of the doctrines I had defended for nearly 2 decades. Preaching about the God who bends swords instead of the God who demands severed heads. I accepted. That Sunday, standing before the small congregation of 40 refugees, I shared my complete story for the first time. I spoke about my pride as an imam, about my brother and his secret conversion, about the prison and the sentence, about the public square and the 5 swords that refused to cut. Those swords, I said, my voice choking with emotion, had cut dozens of necks before. I had seen it with my own eyes. Damascus steel can cut bone like butter. But when they touched my brother, they bent like rubber, not once, not twice, 5 times in a row with 5 different swords. The congregation was in absolute silence, hanging on every word. Why? I continued. Why would God do something so dramatic, so public, so impossible to deny? Because he needed to break me. He needed to show me in the most undeniable way possible that everything I believed was wrong. He needed to prove to me that the true God protects instead of destroys, loves instead of punishes, transforms instead of condemns. When I finished, 20 people came forward asking for prayer. Some were ex-Muslims like me. Others had grown up Christian but had drifted away. All needed to hear that the God of impossible miracles still acts today. If this testimony has impacted you deeply, please do not keep it to yourself. Join this community of faith by subscribing to our channel. You are not alone in your search for truth. Many of us have walked this difficult path before you. By clicking the subscribe button below, you will join a family of seekers and believers who understand the unique challenges you face. Each week, we share new stories of hope and freedom, testimonies of those who found light in their darkest moments. We respect your journey and your privacy completely. Whether you are just curious, questioning your faith, or already on your path to Christ, this space is for you. Subscribe now, and you will receive these powerful stories directly as we publish them. No judgment, no pressure, just authentic testimonies that might speak to the very questions you have been carrying silently in your heart. Remember, the same Jesus who bent those swords can meet you in your isolation too. You do not have to walk this path alone. That was the first of many times I shared my story. The pastor began inviting me to other refugee churches in Istanbul, then to churches in other Turkish cities. My testimony spread, first by word of mouth, then recorded and shared on social media. Saudi refugees began seeking me out, some skeptical, others curious, many desperate to find hope. In the following 2 years, I saw more than 60 ex-Muslims give their lives to Christ after hearing about the swords that bent. How do we know your story is true? Some challenged me. Maybe it is an exaggeration. Maybe it never happened. My answer was always the same. There are 5,000 witnesses who saw what happened in that square. The Saudi government knows it, though they prefer not to talk about it. The religious authorities saw it with their own eyes. And most importantly, my brother is alive when he should be in an unmarked grave. That is the miracle no one can deny. A year later, the pastor proposed something bigger. There are Arabic refugees throughout Europe who need to hear this message. Would you consider expanding your ministry? That is how a new chapter began. Khalid, his family, and I moved to a city in Western Europe, a place where Middle Eastern refugees arrive by the thousands each month. We started a small ministry center focused on helping ex-Muslims adapt to their new faith and their new lives. It is difficult work. Many refugees arrive traumatized, some physically, all emotionally. They have lost their countries, their families, their identities. They are searching for something, anything that will give them hope. We offer that hope, not with empty words, but with the living testimony of what God can do. We show them Khalid, the man who survived 6 beheading attempts without a scratch. We show them me, the ex-Imam who preached death and now preaches life. Sometimes, in my sermons, I hold a ceremonial sword similar to those used against me. It is a replica I bought at an antiques market. Authentic Damascus steel, perfectly sharpened. I raise it before the congregation. This sword, I say, feeling the familiar weight in my hands, is like those that should have severed my brother's head. It was made to kill, forged to destroy, sharpened to cut. But when God says no, the hardest steel softens like wax. When God says, I protect this one, no weapon forged against him will prosper, then I lower the sword and look at my audience. I see faces of all ages, ex-imams like me, ex-militants who used real weapons against Christians, women who escaped forced marriages, young people who left everything they knew to follow Jesus, entire families who crossed deserts and seas in search of freedom to worship. If God can make steel bend, I continue, he can also make your hardest heart bend. If God can transform an imam who preached death into a pastor who preaches life, he can transform you. It does not matter how far you have fallen. It does not matter how impossible your situation seems. The God of impossible miracles is still active today. I have seen miraculous conversions, a former ISIS fighter who arrived tormented by nightmares of the people he had hurt. Now he works in a hospital, helping sick refugees, trying to balance the accounts of his past with acts of mercy in the present. A woman who was forced to wear a burqa her entire life, never allowed to show her face in public. Now she sings in the church choir, her voice free, her face visible, her spirit transformed. A young man who planned to become a suicide bomber, convinced he would reach paradise by killing infidels. Now he studies to be a teacher, dedicated to teaching refugee children that there is a better way. These are the bent swords of today. Not literal steel weapons, but lives that were forged for destruction, but which God transformed into instruments of peace. The story of the 5 swords has spread beyond what I imagined. It was shared on social media millions of times. Videos of my testimony have been watched by people in dozens of countries. I've received messages from ex-Muslims in Indonesia, Malaysia, Egypt, Morocco, and even some risking everything to contact me from Saudi Arabia itself. Your story gave me hope, wrote a man from Riyadh. I thought I was alone, that I was the only one who doubted. But if God transformed you, he can transform me too. The swords that bent are my proof, wrote a woman from Yemen. When my family threatens to kill me for my faith, I remember that God can make steel bend. If he can do that, he can also protect me. These messages arrive weekly. Each one represents a soul seeking truth, risking everything, taking steps of faith in the darkness. And each one reminds me why that horrible day in the public square was necessary. God did not just bend those swords to save my brother's physical life. He bent them to save the spiritual lives of thousands who would hear the story afterward. He bent them to create a testimony so impossible to deny that it would break the skepticism of the most cynical. He bent them to demonstrate that he is the God of the impossible. 3 months ago, I received a letter that made me cry for an hour. It came from Saudi Arabia, sent secretly through channels I should not mention. It was from one of the guards who helped Khalid escape that day in the square. Dear Imam al-Fahad, it began. I know you no longer use that title, but to me you will always be the brave man who was willing to sacrifice everything in that square. I want you to know that day also changed my life. I was one of the reformist guards who helped your brother escape. Seeing those swords bend broke something inside me, or rather built something new. The letter continued, explaining how that guard, whose name I cannot mention for his safety, had been secretly investigating Christianity for years. Seeing the miracle with his own eyes finally convinced him. Now he leads an underground church in Riyadh with 17 members. All ex-Muslims, all risking their lives every time they meet. The swords that bent, he wrote at the end, are our symbol. When fear paralyzes us, when the threat seems too real, we remember God bends swords. If he could do that in the public square before thousands, he can protect us in our secret meetings. Thank you for your courage, though I know it was not courage but forced obedience. God even used that for his glory. I wept reading those words. 17 more people, 17 eternal souls transformed by a miracle I tried to prevent with all my strength. God took my greatest failure and transformed it into his most powerful victory. Now, when I preach, I no longer wear imam robes, no elaborate turban, no embroidered thobe. I wear jeans and a simple shirt, common clothes of a common man. Because that is what I am now, a common man who serves an extraordinary God. But sometimes when I hold that sword in my sermons, I remember the weight in my hands. I remember the sun reflecting on the steel. I remember my brother's eyes full of impossible forgiveness. I remember the sound of metal bending, a sound that should not exist, a sound that defies all known physics. And I remember what I learned that day, that God can take the hardest, the most deadly, the most final, and transform it into something completely different. He can take swords and transform them into testimony. He can take executions and transform them into salvation. He can take imams full of harshness and transform them into pastors full of grace. Your sword may be different from mine. Maybe it is a disease doctors say is terminal. Maybe it is an addiction that has dominated you for years. Maybe it is a past full of shame and guilt. Maybe it is a family that rejected you for your faith. Maybe it is fear that paralyzes you every day. But listen to me well. The same God who bent 5 Damascus steel swords can also bend your sword. He can take what seems hardest, most impossible, most final, and transform it completely. Not because you are special, but because he is the God of miracles. I was an imam for 18 years. I preached harshness, supported executions, defended cruelty as divine will. If God can transform me, he can transform anyone. My brother was sentenced to public execution with his wife and children forced to watch. If God can save him so dramatically, he can save you too. The sharpest sword, forged for months, tempered in fire, sharpened to cut bone, bent like rubber when touching my brother. If God can do that with steel, imagine what he can do with the impossible circumstances of your life. Share this testimony right now. Someone in your contact list needs to hear that God still does impossible miracles today. Do not keep this story to yourself. The God who bent swords in Riyadh can bend the impossible in the life of someone you love. If you are listening to this and have never given your life to Jesus, today is your day. You do not need to be in an elegant church. You do not need to wear special clothes. You just need an open and honest heart. Pray with me now. Jesus, I do not completely understand everything about you, but I want to know you. I saw what you did with Rashid, with Khalid, with those impossible swords. If you can transform an imam who preached death, you can transform me too. Forgive my past. Enter my heart. Be my Lord and Savior. Bend the swords in my life that seem impossible to overcome. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, you are not alone. Comment, I decided to follow Christ, and we will contact you. This community is here to support you, regardless of where you come from or what you have done. The swords bent, lives changed, the impossible became possible, and it can happen for you too, right now, today.